In the studio now, we've been joined by the United States Ambassador to Sierra Leone, Bryan David Hunt. And the ambassador is here to talk about the implementation of the MCC 480 million United States dollars compact agreement to strengthen Sierra Leone's energy, among other things. It could be recalled that on 27th of September this year, the Millennium Challenge Corporation MCC Chief Executive Officer CEO Alice Albright and Sierra Leone's Minister of Finance Sheku Bangura signed a $480 million compact designed to help millions of people gain access to affordable and reliable electricity. This morning, the ambassador is here to talk more about this. Good morning, Ambassador.
Good morning.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Quite an interesting start this morning and sparking an interesting laughter and conversation in the studio. But let's look at the progress we've made at this stage. We've signed, luckily. Now that we've signed, what's next?
So the next step will be for the Sierra Leonean Parliament to ratify the compact. That's the next step in the implementation process. Once that happens, we will be able to set up what's called the Millennium Challenge Authority here in Sierra Leone. That's a board of directors and staff that includes members of the government, civil society, and the private sector. They will be responsible for directing the overall implementation of the $480 million compact. So we're looking forward to seeing that ratified through the Parliament, seeing that institution established so that we can begin the work. As soon as the MCA is staffed and up and running, they will begin the process of contracting out the engineering studies that need to be done for the construction. They'll begin working on several of the regulatory changes that the government hopes that we can support them to make in the power sector, and they'll begin putting in place the various environmental studies and other things that need to precede the construction work.
These people who would be working along, obviously, for sure, they would be getting remuneration for their services. Does it come from the $480 million?
So the salary of the staff of the MCA, the professionals that will be working for the MCA, is paid for by the MCC 480 million. The members of the boards of directors do not get additional remuneration for their service.
I ask this because there are times as well when conversations on some of these grants about how it's spent, you'd hear that some parts of the budget, if not even a huge chunk, also went to remuneration for experts that were mandated to come into the country for the execution of that grant, which in itself drastically reduces the amount of money that goes into the actual work, and in this case, the energy sector. So 480 million, some portions of it are going to remuneration.
So I think it's important to note the MCA staff are Sierra Leoneans. They're not expatriates, so they'll be hired from Sierra Leone. But yes, if you look at the breakdown within the compact itself, there are various categories of funding for each of the projects, which includes the portion that will be spent on the MCA administration. It's a fraction of the overall 480 million, but it's important because someone has to do the contracting, administration, etc. The actual American staff that come from MCC are not paid out of that 480 million. So the MCC staff that work at my embassy are covered by MCC's operational funds, which are different from the 480 million compact.
Great.
Ambassador Hunt, let's talk on the readiness of the implementation. Are you skeptical at this moment, taking into account, of course, we're waiting on Parliament to pass, of course, the documents in Parliament, and at some point in time, you informed the public that the signing of the compacts and, of course, its full implementation is contingent on the 84 recommendations in the tripartite report. At this moment, are you optimistic on the aspects of readiness in this report?
So my government is very optimistic. We would not have signed the agreement if we did not believe that Sierra Leone's government, and in fact Sierra Leone as a whole, including the opposition, was prepared to move forward to keep the country on a democratic trajectory. We don't set aside $480 million with the expectation that we'll never spend it. So the fact that we've decided to sign is indicative of the fact that both the government and the opposition have given us and the people of Sierra Leone repeated assurances that they intend to move forward with implementation of both the tripartite committee recommendations and the agreement for national unity, and that they intend to continue to keep Sierra Leone in line with all of the other eligibility requirements for the MCC. The eligibility requirements go far beyond democracy. They also deal with continuing to invest in people through investments in healthcare and education, continuing to keep the country's private sector alive and vibrant and moving forward with reforms. They involve continuing to control corruption. So it's the full range of eligibility requirements that have to be maintained.
Let's look at the aspects of the role of the opposition at this particular moment and that of civil society. How integral are they in the implementation process?
So the role of the opposition, first and foremost, is going to come in the Parliament as they consider the MCC agreement. They will need to decide from their members of Parliament whether to support or not the agreement that has been signed. So we've been in close discussions with the APC, obviously, about the contours of the compact in full, so that they have a good understanding of what's contained there, what commitments have to be met by Sierra Leone in order to continue to remain eligible for the compact, and how the compact will have positive benefits across the country. They are, of course, integrally involved in, I think, all aspects of governance here in Sierra Leone, not just as part of the implementation of the tripartite, but also at local level government. So we anticipate that they will be consulted and involved throughout the implementation. Civil society itself will have an actual seat on the MCA board. We don't know exactly, it's not been determined yet who will hold that seat for civil society, but they will have a strong voice on the oversight and implementation of the compact through that process. We also consult regularly with a number of non-governmental organizations about the compact, seeking their input, and we'll continue to do that throughout, particularly as it rolls out to district and local level. We'll want to be closely engaged with civil society groups there, as well as with the local traditional leaders and the traditional leadership structures, in addition to district councils and others.
As you say that, in the spirit of democracy and inclusivity, what role would the other political parties be playing in this? Because obviously Sierra Leone doesn't just have the SLPP and the APC, but a bulk of the conversation is centered around the APC and the SLPP. Sure. What about the other political parties?
So I think first and foremost, we work with those who are holding office in government, whether at the local or the national level. And the people of Sierra Leone elected the APC and the SLPP to the vast majority of those positions. To the extent that we have independent local councilors that are still out there, we'll certainly be engaging with them. We'll certainly be engaging with councilors who represent other political parties in the power structures at the local and district levels. And as I say, we want to be very closely engaged with communities as we move forward, particularly in those areas where large construction is going to happen. So we'll be talking with the full range of community activists. Many of those may belong to other political parties. We'll also be engaging, I think, very importantly with the traditional leadership structures, given the important role that the paramount chiefs and other parts of that leadership structure play in Sierra Leonean life.
We have used the tripartite, and sort of as well the US government has used the MCC to sort of get the political actors come on board to do the right thing. But the genesis of this problem stems from elections disagreement, which is not a new thing in Sierra Leone, but it seems to be growing. Sierra Leone and other parts of the world as well, where elections results are strongly contended by the losing side. Have we adequately addressed the problems that led to the 2023 elections result issues? Because while 2027 may seem far, it's really just around the corner. Yeah. And if we don't fix things, it's going to escalate, get worse than it is. Yeah. Have we addressed the fundamental problem that led to the elections issues?
If we move forward with the recommendations that are in the tripartite report, my answer to that will be yes. International experts were very much involved in working with the two political parties' representatives to the Commission in determining exactly what were the root causes of the disagreement. Why did we not have clarity as to the results? Why did people not have faith in the results? And they've made a number of, I think, very serious recommendations that will significantly increase the credibility of the results to the public when they are announced. There's a number of recommendations that deal with the need to ensure more transparency in the result tabulation process, more transparency in the local level results, making sure that you don't have the ability for individuals to do any sort of manipulation around that counting and tabulation process. So I think the safeguards that are built into the tripartite committee's recommendations will have a very positive impact on your electoral system going forward. Will it solve every possible problem that could arise over time? Is difficult to say. Even in the United States, we still have disputes and changes to electoral law as we go through every electoral cycle. The value of what the tripartite has done, I think, is in strengthening institutions so that they can deal with those disputes effectively, making sure that the public has greater faith and the parties have greater faith in the institutions that have been established. I think we've seen since 2002, really, the first post-war elections, a series of electoral recommendations that have been made by domestic and international observers, some of which have been made multiple times and have never been acted on. And what the tripartite committee did was to take those and actually put them forward and say, we need to legislate these. We need to ensure that these recommendations are acted on, because this is why we keep having repeated problems. And when you have repeated problems, they just grow worse and worse and worse because faith dies in the electoral system.
What happens if along the line, now we've signed the MCC, but if along the line the U.S. government feels like, notices, or was given the impression that we as a nation, Sierra Leone, is no longer committed to implementing the recommendations in the tripartite?
Yeah, so the MCC eligibility requirements are very clear that there has to be consistent democratic progress within a country for them to remain eligible. In Sierra Leone's case, the tripartite committee recommendations, the Agreement for National Unity, really are the crux of what has allowed MCC over time to see that forward movement. So I don't believe we're going to reach that stage. I'd be very surprised if we reach that stage.
But what if we do?
But if we do...
Dealing with politicians, yeah, anything's possible.
If we do, the MCC compact includes provisions that allow for the United States government to suspend implementation and assistance if we believe that Sierra Leone has failed to sustain eligibility requirements. So that is a possibility, not one I think we're likely to get to, but as you're right, there are cases where it's had to be invoked. After the coup d'etat in Niger and in Burkina Faso, for example, we had to suspend their MCC compacts because we could not continue to find that they met the eligibility requirements. Now, I hope and I believe that we won't get there in Sierra Leone, but those provisions are always built into the compact agreements.
Ambassador, you're on record to have said that neither ECSL nor political parties have, of course, records of the results to the elections. But nonetheless, yesterday we saw what happened at the All People's Congress Party, wherein supporters are still averse to the process itself and many other things having to do with the 2023 elections. At this moment, what do you think is the role of political heads in terms of information flow to their supporters?
So I think it's critical. My view has always been that we need to be very transparent with the Sierra Leonean public about what is and what is not contained in the Agreement for National Unity and what is not contained in the Tripartite Committee joint and shared recommendations. So I would say the APC, the SLPP, the smaller political parties, the All Political Parties Organization, the government, the parliament, we all have responsibilities to educate the public about where we are going. And I hope that as part of that, we will all be strong advocates for moving forward with the implementation of the committee report. That committee report was something that was drafted and supported by both representatives of both political parties. It was endorsed by the leadership of both parties. It's been endorsed by the cabinet. It had strong international support. So my hope is that we will, in addition to educating the public, also be advocates for moving that forward.
It is very clear that with the MCC, it will usher in a number of jobs, opportunities for Sierra Leoneans.
Yes.
But how will this one develop the country's energy sector, more so in terms of its workforce within the energy sector? How will it help to develop the sector?
So the MCC Compact has built into it training for those who are going to be managing both your grid and your power generation sector going forward. So part and parcel of, in addition to the construction, will be training so that the companies, parastatals, that are responsible for overseeing both your network and your generation grid are able to maintain the infrastructure that we're building over time, able to keep it up to the same standard to which it was built. So there will be a number of programs that are put in place to train the workforce that exists, in some cases to bring on new staff where specialized skills are needed that don't currently exist within EDSA or within your grid manager, and make certain that we're not going to see the infrastructure simply deteriorate once MCC departs.
Now, the aspects of governance and transparency is also another concern from not just the public, but even from some members of the opposition. Who will then regulate same?
Yeah, so it's absolutely vital that we make sure that everything in the carrying out of the compact is fully transparent. MCC has procurement rules that will have to be followed throughout the life of the compact. Those procurement rules are sort of the international best practice that's used by the development banks plus. So we actually go further than the requirements that are used by the World Bank and others in making sure that every procurement that goes out is fully transparent, that all companies have the opportunity to bid on it, that there is a comprehensive evaluation of the technical merits of the proposal as well as the cost, and the intention is always to award the contract to the company that can carry out the work to the highest standard at the most reasonable cost proposal. So that's how we'll go about this. These will all be public tenders. They will come out through the MCA. They will be made open to Sierra Leonean companies, regional companies, international companies who want to bid on them. And there will be very clear pre-qualification requirements that come out so that companies know whether or not they have the expertise, the financial wherewithal, et cetera, to be able to submit a successful bid.
Ambassador, over the years we've had quite a significant investment into our energy sector. Even the US government as well has been helping Sierra Leone in that area.
And the way we do that is through radical inclusion. It means it
2000 to now. We still struggle with energy in the country. The concern for some people is we keep hearing about the money Sierra Leone is receiving to solve energy issues, but the situation remains the same. How does this MCC compact hope to achieve a significant change in the energy sector?
So not to criticize what's been done up until now, but the reality is prior to the MCC grant, no one has put forward the amount of money that it would take to actually build an entirely new transmission and distribution network. We have been putting patches on infrastructure that is now decades old and in many cases The spare parts are no longer available. The technology has moved on. So we've all been doing Band-Aid solutions, or we've been looking at off-grid. We've been doing solar solutions, which are wonderful for a community, but also very expensive and very hard to roll out nationally. So what the MCC will do is effectively give you an entirely new transmission and distribution network. It will be up to modern international standards, and if managed appropriately, should be easy to sustain for the country over a long period of time, and will address all of the problems that we're currently dealing with, from the Band-Aid solutions that we've been putting on infrastructure that frankly has long outlived its lifespan.
One of the things that the government of Sierra Leone, from the days of President Ahmad Tijan Kaba of blessed memory onto President Ernest Bai Koroma to now President Biu, is also Bumbuna, for example, but we do have Kapa temporarily supplying energy. What would MCC maintain? Is this like we're getting the money and we're going to be paying Kapa ship to continue to supply us, or is it going into building Bumbuna and more of Bumbuna? How is it? In what area specifically?
Yeah, so our investments will be in the transmission and distribution of the power grid through MCC. There are already private sector projects in place, including the Western Power Project, that are being constructed that will ultimately take car power out of the equation, and they will be the primary source of distribution. There are private sector investors who are looking at doing phase 2 of the Bumbuna hydro project and a couple of other hydro projects. So our view has always been what we can best do from MCC on the generation side is to put in place the regulatory environment, the operating environment that encourages private sector investors to come and invest in your power generation. That's really the area where private sector, frankly, globally, does better than government. It's in the distribution network and the transmission network that governments, frankly, have to be involved because they're not economically revenue generating for a company on their own. And that's where MCC is going to be making the bulk of the capital investment, is in building that transmission and distribution grid that will then connect these new private sector generation projects that are coming in line over the next 3-4 years into that grid so that the power can get distributed nationwide. You need both.
I saw the agreement. It seemed like it has a lot of bureaucracy on it, a lot of caveats as to the pointers that will lead to the implementation of the MCC. Why is that the case?
So there are really 4 reforms that are necessary as preconditions. One is to come up with a map of the overall power sector. One has to do with coming up with the metrics by which we will measure success for each of the individual projects. One is a thorough review of EDSA's financing to make sure that we understand how much debt is out there, and so that we can begin to move EDSA over time towards private sector management. And the final has to do with putting in place the policies that are necessary for managing the grid that we're going to be building. The reasons we've identified those 4 after much discussion with the government is we think those are the 4 areas that are really necessary before we can say, yeah, let's go ahead and invest $480 million in the country. There are also things the government can do quite quickly. Having talked with folks in government, I think we're at a point where 3 of those are almost done, and the 4th, the audit of EDSA, is something that we're prepared to finance and contract as soon as the MCA is up and running. So I don't anticipate those will be significant delays in moving forward, but they represent sort of the baseline one would need in order to say, yes, this will have the impact we want it to have.
This support from the US government is coming in at a time when Sierra Leone's energy sector keeps plummeting from things keeps getting worse from where it was before this time. Yeah. Ambassador Hunt, at the end of the implementation of this project, where do you think it will position Sierra Leone's energy sector?
So the reason that we have decided to invest the amount of money we have is because we're confident that the proposal from Sierra Leone will ensure that the vast majority of Sierra Leoneans have reliable electricity at the end of this project. That's the only way that we could have gotten agreement from the U.S. government to invest this level of funding in the energy sector. So I'm quite confident that the blackouts that we've all learned to live with in Freetown will be a thing of the past. Folks in rural areas in the south and north of the country will begin to, and the east of the country will have access to electricity, and will be able to remove electricity and power generation as a constraint to private sector investment. Because as we all know, when you have to fund your own generation capacity, that's a significant investment, and that is a deterrent, frankly, to private sector investment in the country. So we hope this will eliminate, or we're confident this will eliminate that constraint.
Just as we try to round off, and we know you're on the clock, what the MCC money isn't for, on that list is paying our debt in the energy sector. I know we still owe car powership. Is that on the list of what the money is not meant for? That's
correct. We're not, the U.S. government, under our law, we cannot pay off your country's accumulated debt to a private sector entity like Car Power. That's not something that our domestic legislation allows us to do. So that will be something that the government of Sierra Leone will need to find solutions for. My understanding is they're already working with the IMF, with the World Bank, with others to figure out how to put resources in place that can deal both with the debt to Car Power, but I think equally importantly, the debt to the West African power pool, which frankly is something that is going to need to be addressed given the reliance that you all have on importing energy right now from Cote d'Ivoire.
Well, rounding off and letting you go, closing curtsies, what would you like to leave with Sierra Leoneans, those living in Sierra Leone and those in the diaspora, particularly in the U.S.?
So I think the most important message is that this is a significant step forward for Sierra Leone's development. The MCC investment is going to lay the groundwork that will allow Sierra Leone to really move forward, both on its human development indicators in education and healthcare, as well as in its economic indicators by attracting private sector investment to this country. We need more Sierra Leoneans, both those who live here and those who live in the diaspora, to have the confidence to come and put their money in Sierra Leone, to invest in productive businesses here. And having reliable, stable power is really a prerequisite for that to happen.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Bryan David Hunt, for your time with us this morning. Hopefully we get you in subsequent editions as the MCC agreement with Sierra Leone progresses.
Look forward to it.